Hi there. Thanks for tuning in today to how to develop and refine your problem-solving skills. I'm so glad you're here. Unfortunately, I am not able to give this webinar live and get into as much detail as I want, as I need to travel next week to tend to a family matter. But I do hope to engage with you in the future, either online or at the next Oregon Women in Higher Education Conference. My name is Jess Walchmit, and I am a Market Research Coordinator at Oregon State University in Corvallis, and I have been in this role for about 1.5 years now. Prior to this position, I spent 7 years working at the University of Iowa, first in library administration and then with undergraduate honors students across all colleges. From a young age, I was always thinking about how to make things better. I've always been drawn to formulas and structures, always curious about how things work and why. Today, as a market research coordinator at Oregon State, I get to specialize in the understanding of the supply and demand for online degree programs, primarily within the United States. This role has given me the opportunity to dive into a wealth of information about workforce demographics, higher education, and the future of work. I've been involved with Oregon Women in Higher Education for about 1.5 years, and I'm here today in an attempt to make my knowledge relevant for other members. So I'm going to walk through a high-level problem-solving framework with you and discuss the 5 main steps. Then we're going to discuss the importance of mindset when it comes to problem solving. At the very end, I will offer a call to action with the intent to motivate and inspire you to take the best next step for you. But before we dive in, I would like to get my soapbox out. I believe I am often what gets in my own way for solving problems. You might relate, and maybe it's our unwillingness to take lead, our unwillingness to demand what we want, or the fact that we're apologizing all the time. Or maybe it's our unwillingness to be confrontational or engage with conflict. I get it. I'm right there with you. But what I want to do today is invite you to join me in changing this behavior. Let's set an intention together or make a promise to always believe in ourselves. Trust that if we make a mistake, we'll learn from it. If we don't know what to do, we'll figure it out. And if we make a commitment, we'll stand by it. So before I get started here, I'm going to switch my screen. Bear with me for just a moment. Okay. So when I began prepping for this webinar, I asked those who had signed up what problems came to mind when they registered. And I got a handful of responses, and the 3 common themes that came out from these responses are shown here on the screen. So ultimately, it was communication, buy-in, and meeting stakeholder needs. More specifically, it's how to adapt our communication when dealing with problems, how to solve problems when multiple stakeholders are involved who have different ideas for solutions, how to create solutions that work for many people. So what I've done is adjusted the content of this webinar with the intent to make it a little more relevant, and I'll include resources to help address these challenges. So based on the research I've done from experts at EAB, based on the research I've read, not done, from experts at EAB, EduVentures, Burning Glass Technologies, and Learning House, a dozen other highly respected agencies and organizations, it's clear that our work and our workplaces are changing. How do you maintain your competitive advantage in a world of artificial intelligence, micro-credentials, boot camps, continuing education, professional development, etc.? What I have seen is that transferable skills or transportable skills, these are valuable at every stage of your career, and they can be applied on your first day of the job. Extensive research has gone into and continues to be done on these skills, what they are, what they look like. And I will personally even say that this holds true in my own research over and over again. these common soft skills show up regularly. And if you haven't figured it out yet, problem solving is one of those. And that's why we're talking about it today. So in preparation, I read many problem solving frameworks. And while they all generally covered the same steps, I found that Scott Halford's was the most concise. And so I've used this article shown on the screen here to frame my core content today. So if you're interested, please do read it. Look into more about Scott Halford here. His work is in achievement psychology, which includes brain-based behavioral science, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, and the principles of influence. So moving into our framework, step 1 is identify. Step 2, ideate. Step 3, evaluate. Step 4, execute. And step 5, re-examine. So in step 1, identify, this is the beginning stage where you're trying to gather information and understand what it is you're trying to solve here. There are 3 common suggestions that come up in this step, and that is organize knowledge correctly, ask the right questions, and work forward from known to unknown. And so what does that mean? Well, organizing knowledge correctly means that you're taking the relevant information within the context that you need it. So you're not gathering every piece of information that is out there, but you're looking at what is going to help you move through this process. Asking the right questions, this is kind of thinking about quality. The quality of the question is going to be reflective of the quality of the response. It's kind of this idea of using Google. If your question isn't concise, your responses aren't going to be. So pretty straightforward there. And then working forward from known to unknown, this is intended to really make sure that you're keeping it factual and relevant to what you're working with. You don't need to take in opinions or other information that isn't necessarily known to be true. Here are some questions that can help you in this step. What actions are happening and what is the motivation for those actions? What characteristics or resources are changing or are in motion? And what are the different entities involved? Using these questions can really help you explore this identify step and move you through this framework. All right, in step 2, ideate, I want to start here with a warning. Leave your judgment at the door. This phase is intended to be non-judgmental, so throw everything out there. You'll evaluate it later. Don't get hung up on details, whether or not it's logical, is it possible, is it fair, is it whatever. Some of the best solutions sounded like the most ridiculous ideas ever. Moving on to step 3, evaluate. This general idea here is to find the most ideal solution for your situation. Try looking or measuring for high impact, low complexity. Complexity you can think about as time and resources. How much time is it taking to get something done? How much money or how many staff hours are going into this? The higher that is, the more complex. One strategy that might be helpful to bring up at this point is a SWOT analysis. And if you haven't heard of what that is, here's a short video that explains.
SWOT analysis is a key part of any business and strategic plan. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses are internal factors, and opportunities and threats are external factors. A SWOT diagram analyzes a project or business venture by focusing on each of these factors. It typically consists of 4 boxes, one for each area, but the exact shape may vary depending on the design. SWOT diagrams can be especially useful when trying to decide whether or not to embark on a certain venture or strategy by visualizing the pros and cons. By clearly outlining all positives and negatives of a project, SWOT analysis makes it easier to decide how to move forward.
So here you'll see an example of a SWOT analysis I created for this webinar. The problem we're working to solve is all of the challenges that go into siloed database management systems within an organization. So this SWOT analysis is attempting to assess a particular solution. So if you're looking at the strengths here, you'll see improved data governance, more efficient access management, increased consistency and reliability. Under weaknesses, onboarding all new users will take time and resources. It will probably cost more money to have or use whatever this new tool or service is. And the possibility of this technology implemented failing to meet our needs is itself a weakness. Under opportunities, I found insights gained about enrollment, retention, graduation when we're talking about higher ed, but this could look at like sales or buybacks or whatever it might be depending on your industry. So this could be to improve student success, to improve revenue, customer relations, etc. New ways to collaborate or improve processes, and ability to predict revenue gains or losses. And then underneath threats, bugs or inaccuracies in the data, incorrect projections or predictions, and loss of data or compromised data. So just as an example, this can be a SWOT analysis to show what a particular solution, tech solution, could look like for an organization. All right, so moving on into step 4, execute. This is probably the most challenging phase for myself. And so to give you some structure here on what this would look like, you'll want to define responsibility, delegate clearly, and establish accountability.
Here's Roger.
George, can I have my Bronco back? I don't have any cash right now, but I need my car.
Well, I need some solar panels installed on my roof.
I don't know anything about solar.
Well, Charlie Shepard does, and he needs a well dug on his property. You help him dig the well, he'll help me with the panels, and I'll fix your car. Deal?
Yeah, deal. I'll call Charlie.
Now, if only every problem-solving situation can be that quick and simple and be received that well. So in response to that example, I want to talk a little bit about what might be a confrontational example. So consider you're needing to present an idea or a solution that you just know is not going to be received well. One suggestion I have is to begin with what should continue. This establishes a positive foundation for the conversation where you're really acknowledging what's already being done that's helping the situation. And so, for example, we'll say here, we're all here to find a way to resolve the challenges faced with our outdated and inconsistent database management systems. What I've experienced proves to me that we must continue to engage in these valuable conversations where we can better understand each other's point of view and what our needs are for the future. In order to let us do that, we must stop considering keeping our current technology in place as a viable option. I understand this means a much more complex next step for us, and I propose that we discuss the idea of hiring a consultant whose expertise can help us research new tech options. So again, just another example, but really establishing what the motivation is, what is already being done, that's a good thing, before you start trying to talk about what needs to change can really go a long way. And the last step here, step 5, re-examine. This step can look different depending on what your situation is. One suggestion I have is to use what I call, or what you may have heard as a stop, start, continue assessment. And this is really simple. You ask 3 questions. What do we want to stop doing? What do we want to start doing? And what do we want to continue to do? So this builds a little bit on the previous theory about talking about what needs to continue to be done to establish a positive foundation for the conversation. Here, this really helps you define 3 next steps, 3 action items at the end of your process. So we've talked a little bit about the framework, and again, that is going to be identify, ideate, evaluate, execute, and re-examine. And next, we're going to move into talking a little bit about what a problem-solving mindset is and how it can help the situation. So one component of a problem-solving mindset, I believe, is responsibility. And a quote here to get you thinking about what this is running away from a problem only increases your distance from the solution. You know, ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. And in fact, sometimes it usually makes it worse. I think we all understand this concept and it's not really new to us. But really taking this, the ownership of this through the process can help you be more successful. Emotional intelligence and active listening. So it is important to feel and experience your emotions, but do not base your next action on them. Now, this isn't always true in every context, but when you're thinking about a professional situation, more often than not, emotions are not to be at the forefront. And so you'll really want to be mindful of your emotional intelligence. Active listening is another approach that you may have heard about, and I highly recommend, if not, to do more research on. But this is really thinking about engaging with what you're hearing as opposed to trying to understand it right away. So another statement here, you can increase your problem-solving skills by honing your question asking ability. And this goes back a little bit to a concept I talked about earlier where asking the right questions, the quality of the question is reflective of the quality of the response. And so really exploring how you communicate with folks, how you listen to them, your body language, everything around your emotional intelligence and active listening skills can really help in your problem-solving abilities. Objective perspective allows you to reframe your problem so that solutions or ideas or insight that you may not otherwise be able to gain can come to light. So for example, inside of every problem lies an opportunity. By making something objective, by working with the facts, you essentially make it more approachable. And I want to point out something here real quick. That S, perspectives. Really consider all of the stakeholders being impacted by your solution. Consider what their perspective might be. This helps a lot when you're communicating and trying to convey the change you're attempting to implement or whatever solution you're trying to move forward. All right, so we have covered a framework. We have talked a little bit about mindset. And at this point, you're probably thinking, well, this is all good and well, but the problem I'm facing is not my fault. I get it. It's really hard to think about addressing a problem that you did not cause. And what I'd like to offer in response is yes, that is so true. It is not your fault. And what are you going to do about it? Make a choice here. This is what I'm asking. I'm asking you to make a decision. This problem that you're thinking about, that you're saying, this isn't my fault. You can choose to live with it, to accept it, and move on. Don't let it bother you anymore. Or you can choose to address it, to do something about it. If it's something that you are unwilling to live with, do something. You might also be thinking, but I don't have the authority, the intelligence, the power, etc., to solve the problem. I've been there, and I still am there oftentimes. I think this too. And what I'd like to respond with is, says who? When someone asked me this, it made me stop. And I realized that most often, I'm the one telling myself I don't have the authority, the intelligence, the power, etc., to solve a problem. It's that negative self-talk. Now that I am more aware of it, it is a lot easier to ignore. And you know, sometimes it's not just the negative self-talk. There might be other people saying that you can't do it. Prove them wrong. That's all I have to say about that. All right, so we're nearing the end of the webinar, and I have given you a lot of information. You have a framework, you have steps, you have tips and strategies. You're probably thinking, okay, but what does this all even look like? What do I do with this? Well, just to give you an idea of the different ways that you can approach problems, I'm going to introduce one more framework. And this is the problem tree or an issue tree. I'm going to play a short video that describes what this looks like using a real world situation. A few more additional tips that I'd like to leave you with here. Practice alignment. This is very much talking about compromise. Paul Axtell, who is known on the Oregon State University campus for his conversational skills workshop, talks a lot about this. And so if you just simply Google Paul Axtell practicing alignment, I'm sure you'll find more on this. I'd also invite you to exercise your curiosity, going back to the ideate phase, even the identify phase. Really think about exercising your curiosity, asking those questions, and exploring what the unknown is there. See what you can figure out. Another tip I have is using two strategies, which are perspective taking and argument generation. These are pretty straightforward. Perspective taking is putting yourself in someone's shoes and using that to justify your argument. And argument generation is actually an exercise that could be really fun to explore during problem solving. And what you're doing is asking folks to identify reasons that support the opposing opinion. So maybe perhaps in the ideate phase, this is an exercise that you and your team or just yourself explores as well. And what I'll do after this webinar is I will gather all of the different links that point to the resources that I've used to gather this content today and provide that in an email follow-up. Now what? All right, I have all these problems still, and you've told me all of this information about how I can approach them, but now what? Well, what I ask you to do here is meet yourself where you are at and begin there. So in order to do that though, you got to determine where that is. What I'm going to do is send out a few links to some self-assessment tools to consider. And these are going to be assessments that you'll take to help you understand what your problem solving style is, how you approach problems, and even thinking about next steps to further develop your abilities. I'd also ask you to reach out to me. I am looking to build my network and I would love to discuss this topic with you more. I'm really sad I didn't get to talk about it in even more detail, given that this is a pre-recorded webinar, but I essentially can talk about this all day long. And that's all I have for you today. I really hope that you found this information to be useful. I apologize it isn't as organized and engaging as I had liked, but given the situation, this was the best solution I can offer. Thank you so much.